Hello people, welcome back to Jed Skeptic Media. I just want to show you my webpage I've been working on. It was lying a wee bit stagnant for a while there, and I've just cleaned it up a little bit. I've deleted some pages, I've added a couple of new ones. The reading books is still there, and when I finish reading this book, that will go to this page. My blog's there. It's got quite a nice post there from I think it was last summer. Yep. Um, we've got a members page, which is pretty cool. This is quite new. So if you fancy checking that out, guys, www.jedskepticmedia.com, and it's free to be a member. So come and check it out. I was even thinking about putting a Discord in it, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So this is a new page. If you fancy further reading on this outside of my own research, these are some good pages to check out. This guy here, this old Jewish guy, Davidi, he runs the Hebrew Nations, and he's got a lot of good stuff on the Celts being connected to the Hebrews. Anyway, enough about my webpage. Check it out. It'll no cost you a bolt. Right, back to the book. Ireland, Land of the Pharaohs, Chapter 5. Background to the ritual battle. The falsification of history has done more to mislead humans than any single thing known to mankind. Rousseau. There was a promise of a pleasant morning as the pre-dawn filled the vault of the eastern sky over Dunor Hill, situated in mystic Emwan. William, Prince of Orange, stirred. He knew this was to be a momentous day, one he had been waiting on for a long time. The time had finally arrived when his destiny was to be fulfilled with the help of his uncle. He was to become a Horus king. The calendar date was the 1st of July in the year 1690, OS calendar, in common with James II. William was looking forward with expectation to the looming ritual battle. They had both arrived with perfect symmetry in his ancient kingdom of monoliths and mythological mistiness, although Bruna Boyne, M1, had welcomed William 2 days earlier, which was necessary because he had to complete certain initiations, as ancient tradition mandated, before he would be permitted to embark on the ritual. On his arrival, he billeted his European army adjacent to the banks of the Boyne River and withdrew to the old Cistercian abbey of Mellifont with his generals to discuss tactics. The long-established rationale for his presence here was to engage in a battle that was to define the political and religious direction of Europe. Unknown at that time was the momentous effect it would have to the rest of the world as the ripples of revolution raced across the Atlantic to ignite the American War of Independence. Europe held its collective breath. Would the day go with the de jure king, James, and the old world order represented by the Vatican and the status quo, or the de facto king, William, and the new world order represented by the House of Orange and the Reformation? Traditional history has this to say. The very roots of this battle go back to the Reformation, following which Christianity in Europe was divided into those who supported the Reformed faith and those who remained loyal to the papacy. It is understandable, if considered from this perspective, that the majority of people would falsely identify the ritual as a religious battle. William belonged, along with a faction of northern European princes, to the League of Augsburg, who were struggling to snatch power from the grasp of the Vatican faction and the Catholic Bourbon absolutists. This was the first serious attempt in history to free Europe from theocratic rule and to introduce secular government, with one notable exception, the Bohemian experiment. In retrospect, we can witness that the first tentative steps towards self-determination was constitutional monarchy and the evolution of parliamentary democracy. To say, as some Machiavellian commentators do, that an autocratic pope was an ally of William in his battles against James II and Louis XIV is to take the supposed support completely out of its context. In fact, William would have indeed needed the patronage of 3 popes, a point that most historians possibly intentionally overlook. The pope at the time William arrived in Ireland was Alexander the VIII, who was not as hostile towards Louis as his predecessors had been. Louis, during the tenure of Alexander, was attempting to reconcile himself with the Vatican and had profited by the peaceful dispositions of the new Pope, who restored to him Avignon and renounced the long-abused right of asylum of the French embassy. Alexander was elected 5th of October 1689 and died at Rome on the 1st of February 1691. He was sandwiched between two other popes, both called Innocents. The one preceding him was Innocent the 11th, who is the one recognised by historians as supporting William, but who died on the 11th of August 1689, almost a year before the ritual battle. Following Alexander was Innocent the 12th. Ironically, he was elected on the 12th of July 1691. None of these popes, it is true, would have been aggrieved if the Augsburg League, known after 1689 as the Grand Alliance, had defeated Louis. He was continually at loggerheads with the Vatican. Although, as stated above, he made an effort to make peace with Alexander, who condemned his attempted domination of Europe and the Church in France. Nevertheless, it is farcical to say that any of these popes would have sponsored a non-Catholic and liberal modernizer to boot in his attempt to gain the English throne, or that they did not want papal control of Europe for the Vatican faction. Innocent XI did not approve the imprudent manner in which James II attempted to restore Catholicism in England. He also repeatedly expressed his displeasure at the support which James II gave to the autocratic King Louis XIV. Is that the 14th? It is. King Louis XIV and his measures hostile to the Church. It is therefore not surprising that Innocent XI had little sympathy for the Catholic King of England, and that he did not assist him in his hour of trial. There is, however, no ground for the accusation that Innocent XI was informed of the designs which William of Orange had upon England, much less that he supported him in the overthrow of James II. Whatever the truth of this, it becomes multifaceted in Ireland when historical and political affairs are discussed. As one anonymous wit remarked, to talk about Irish politics and logic together is probably an indication the speaker has never been there. We know that the consequences of the battle were to bring about the establishment of rule by man of his own affairs, later expressed as government of the people by the people. William's friend and ally, the philosopher John Locke, expressed it in these terms: the legislative neither must nor can transfer the power of making laws to anybody else, or place it anywhere but where the people have. Unfortunately, we never got further than the first infant steps towards its implementation, and were stuck with a feculent and manipulative democracy. In America, the founding fathers knew better and adopted the Republican system of government. Regrettably, even this only lasted for a relative short time in history, never to fulfill its promise. But if compared to the previous notion of the divine right of kings and mass consciousness, it was undeniably a leap forward in social evolution to at least partial freedom. William himself was free of intolerance and sectarianism, having Catholics as allies, one of those being the Catholic Emperor Leopold. William's victory was celebrated with a playing of Te Deum in Catholic Vienna, though with mixed feelings by the Pope, which gives us some indication of the political landscape of the period. The Vatican was not overtly concerned by his victory in Ireland, seeing it as a means to an end. Their attitude could be summed up by the old axiom, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." The ranks of William's army showed a robust mix of religions. His personal Blue Guard was mainly Catholic, but they also had a sprinkling of Swiss Protestants in their ranks. Following the end of war, William called a parliament to safeguard Catholics, in particular as may preserve them from any disturbance upon the account of their said religion, but the Irish and English landed classes, remembering that William was called to reign but not to rule, went forth with penal laws. Parliament before William's time was a bit of a sham. It was regarded by the Stuart kings as an instrument for the royal will, despite the fact that the head of Charles I was parted from his body in 1649. The status quo was re-established 11 years later when Charles II was restored to the throne on his birthday, the 29th of May. Because of the autocratic nature of the Stuart's dynasty rule, albeit mostly benign, there was always a danger of a coup. This, according to Steve Bergstrom, and as a reminder, is exactly what took place in 1666 during the reign of Charles II, with the passing of a little-known Act of Parliament called the British Law of 1666, properly titled Act 18 Charles II, which nullified the obscure mixed money case of 1604, adjudicated, defined at the time by recognised legal standards, the power of England's private strong room keepers. This provided them with the means and authority to place their private receipts for precious metals into circulation without penalty and with favour alongside the currency of aristocrats and or governments. Consequently, there was a kind of Machiavellian silent coup d'etat which effectively handed the throne of England to a few aristocratic families, merchant bankers, who became the anonymous rulers or secret government. The power behind the throne had triumphed completely, but for good or evil, who knows? That is not within the purview of this story. The divine right of the king was undermined, and although it was officially ended by the formula adopted by the Convention Parliament in 1689, it received the coup de grace at Boyne, and with James left the threat of absolutism to Ireland. Nevertheless, the following statement should be considered carefully, especially as it applies to James. Arguments of support for Stuart tyranny should be closely re-examined, as few merits for it are found in the historical record. William and James have been given a bad and generally unfair press. Both were a great deal more tolerant given the context of their time, and they have been credited with. James, for example, has been blamed for everything from the Great Fire of London to the murder of his brother Charles II. Note the echoes of Seth murdering his brother Cyrus by poisoning and attempting to turn Britain into a vassal state of the Vatican. Overall, the Irish were more reluctant to let go of authoritarian rule, especially that of the Divine Stuarts, than the rest of Britain, or as William's spin doctor Bishop Burnet put it, for the priests who governed the Irish with a blind and absolute authority. Acceptance in Ireland of theocratic rule is reflected in relatively modern times by the acceptance of the punitive authority of the Roman Church and evangelistic fundamentalism that more or less mirror each other. Sorry people, it's late. It's 1 a.m. Nonetheless, the pivotal point for the destabilization of religious control was the extraordinary events at the Boyne River, although in the end these events were manipulated by the very forces they were meant to overcome. This scenario has happened repeatedly in history from time immemorial. Still, as happened in the case of Akhenaten, the priestly establishment's attempts to destroy all traces of these mysterious events were ultimately unsuccessful. We will return to Brú na Bóinne to witness a ritual, but before we do, we must consider the extraordinary events from the perspective of a battle, as a traditional historian has recorded them for us. This will give us the final pieces of the puzzle, which will permit us to go through the hidden portal. The way will open then to finally reassess the same events from a more radical and esoteric point of view. William, for instance, underwent at least 2 Masonic-type initiations, as well as participated in the ancient Osiris ritual. This also indicates that the participants were adherents of a solar religion, although much older, as duplicated in de facto Christianity. One of the several reasons for this ritual was to transfer the authority of kingship of the Kingdom of Britain from James to William, and so to keep it securely within the Stuart family bloodline. See chapter 6. Understanding the ritual battle reveals our path to the obscure portal where we discover Ireland's astonishing secret history, which is also the history of the Western peoples. Prince William entered Ulster by passing through the port of Carrickfergus, reputedly the seaport where the prophet Jeremiah and the princess Tara entered Ireland, as we saw earlier. Ulster is where the Scots first entered Ireland. On June the 14th, 1690, and immediately proceeded towards Belfast. He travelled along the north coast of the Lough of the same name to meet his Prussian general, Friedrich Hermann, Duke of Schomberg, who had fled France with Huguenots when Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes, making it a crime to profess Huguenot, Calvinist opinions. Schomberg landed at a little harbour at the southern side of the Lough called Groomsport, near the town of Bangor. The previous August, with an army of 10,000 men, he and William met to discuss their strategy for the coming battles at the White House. The White House is now a small museum in a residential area known by the same name, between Carrickfergus and Belfast. It has presently been restored by the knowledgeable Irish historian and author Bob Armstrong and his hard-working team. William leaves the White House and continues his journey to Belfast, where he is welcomed by the Mayor and Corporation of Belfast, along with the Reverend George Walker, who led the defence of Londonderry. Bonfires were lit and guns were discharged to signal a royal welcome. Leaving Belfast behind him, William travelled briskly and uneventfully south to the Valley of the Kings, where he arrived early on the morning of June the 30th. He established his headquarters in the ruins of Mellifont, one of the oldest Cistercian abbeys in Ireland. Note that for Cistercian, read Knights Templar, St Bernard was influential in the formation of both. James had been in Ireland for more than a year before William landed. Richard Talbot, Lord Tyrconnell, had welcomed him ashore at Kinsale on 12th of March 1689 and gave him the good news that he had raised an army of 80,000 to fight for him. He was pleased with the efforts of the Lord Viceroy and raised him to the rank of Duke as a reward for his services. We will discover that these services are completely at odds with what received history supposed them to be. James travelled north and reached Dublin on Palm Sunday, coincidentally, which was March the 24th, 1689, where he received a rapturous welcome and, accompanied by his natural sons, the Duke of Berwick and the Grand Prior Fitzjames, 40 young girls dressed in white danced the ancient rinka, scattering flowers as they danced. A green flag floated from the main tower bearing the enigmatic inscription, "Now or never, now and forever," with these ancient celebrations indicating once again something more profound was happening. James had until August of that year to consolidate his hold in Ireland before the arrival of Schomberg and his troops, which he made good use of by founding a de facto parliament in Dublin, known as the Patriot Parliament. He also produced his own money called the gun money, since it was made out of gunmetal. Another reason, from the merchant bankers' view, was that it had to be replaced since they did not want anyone issuing real money to oppose their fiat money, money or currency with no intrinsic value, in fact money created out of thin air. Apparently this was how he paid his Franco-Irish army. He also promised that if he was successful, this currency could be redeemed to the amount of twice the face value. The real reason he needed to mint his own money was a feeble attempt to recapture control of the economic system lost by his brother in 1666. The plain facts are these. 2 centuries ago, the King of England plundered the goldsmiths of London of all their ready money, partly for the reasons already mentioned herein, and partly, perhaps, to make amends for this act. His son Charles II substantially sold and surrendered to the goldsmiths the state prerogative of coinage. But after William was victorious, the gun money was devalued to a fraction of its face value. Large half-crowns and those overstamped as crowns were revalued as 1 penny, making it completely useless. Before this, however, James had been welcomed and was in control of the greater part of the island, with the exception of some pockets of resistance in the northeast, Ulster, where the anti-papists vowed to fight to the end. Included in these pockets were the important towns of Enniskillen and Londonderry, whose resistance was to lead to the unravelling of James's wider plans. Reverend Walker and the trade apprentices shut the gates of the maiden city of Londonderry to prevent the Jacobite troops, led by Lieutenant Richard Hamilton, an erstwhile ally of William, from entering. The resulting siege lasted 105 days, and not even the arrival of the king himself could persuade the garrison to surrender, and it was not until 31st of July 1689 that the besiegers withdrew. The other major town, Enniskillen, had also been besieged and was relieved soon after Londonderry. With these victories under their belt, the rest of Ulster fell into the hands of those who had declared for William, consisting mainly of Ulster Scots, the red branch of the Scots-Irish. Their grip was reinforced by the arrival of Schomberg. He spelt his name Schoenberg 2 weeks later in his army. Meanwhile, James had succeeded in raising an army of 20,000 men at Ardee by mid-September. This army had been raised south of the Boyne, but surprisingly James did not order all of them north for an inevitable confrontation with Schomberg. Orange, who was to land in Ulster, where Schomberg lay, and give him battle. These troops convened there, but not so many as should have met for the design. Too many regiments of foot were left in garrisons, and that to no purpose. This was a strange oversight in the king and his generals not to have brought the strength of the kingdom to the field, since the resolution had been taken of putting all upon a battle. James and his army crossed the Boyne into Ulster in mid-September and came head-to-head with Schomberg's army, which had been joined by the Ulster Corps of Londonderry and Enniskillen, fresh from the victory at Carrickfergus at the beginning of October, giving him a combined strength of 16,000 men. This confrontation was not atypical of the comedy of errors that had beset James ever since William set foot on English soil at Brixham in November 1688. James's antics gave rise to the old nursery rhyme that typifies confusion and poor leaderships, the grand old Duke of York. But we are looking through different eyes, and we will ultimately discover other reasons for this apparent chaos. James's supposed indecisiveness in the battles that led up to the ritual battle and immediately afterwards, collectively known as the Williamite Wars, will be seen for what it really was. One of James's own officers, Charles O'Kelly, said the whole thing was a conspiracy to hand Ireland to William, of which more later. The stories of James' abilities, or lack thereof, may have some credence, if his adventures in Ireland were perceived only as a series of battles, but has been reiterated it was much more profound than this. The meeting of Schomberg and James north in Dundalk, we will see in retrospect, is a clue to the underlying reasons for his actions. Neither side felt like engaging in battle, so each returned to their winter quarters. The only casualties during that long drawn-out winter were the ones who fell to disease, with Schomberg losing half his entire command to dysentery, typhus, and influenza. It was not until the spring that both sides became active again. Schomberg left James in control of the southern end of Moray Pass and Dundalk, and turned north to welcome William and his army, and to replenish his own losses, but not before he took the king's fortress, called Charlemont, in the country of Armagh, before the landing of the Prince of Orange and his forces, to the end His Highness might find the whole province of Ulster entirely under his obedience at his arrival. Consequently, the stage was set for Prince William to enter the ancient province of Ulster and make ready for the approaching ritual drama in the mythic Valley of the Kings. As we chart the progress of the precipitants to the Boyne Valley, we will discover both arriving at the precise prearranged time. No other time of the year would have been more appropriate. Their determination to let nothing stop them from arriving at the appointed rendezvous, which accounts for their seemingly irrational conduct, should be noted. William reached Brune and Boyne without meeting any significant opposition. James had already retreated across the Boyne River from his strategic position at the southern end of the Moray Pass, also known historically as the Gap of the North, which was so ably defended by Cuchulainn against the enemies of Ulster. We have referenced the work of Professors Bailey and Kenny, both of whom painstakingly illustrate that the myth of Cuchulainn, like the rest of Irish history, is not much more than manipulated mythology. Sir F. Palgrave underlines this in his work The New Commonwealth, when he agrees that what is traditionally believed is not necessarily true. The fundamental rule of science, whether in history or elsewhere, is not what has been believed, but what is true. The justification for James making his apparent irrational decision to retreat from an unassailable position against the advice of his generals appeared to show James's incompetence and cowardice. But this believed coward had New York, previously New Amsterdam, named in his honour for his daring exploits at sea and in America, where he defeated the Dutch. As a soldier, he served with distinction in the service of France for Louis XIV and fought for Spain. It was reported that Turenne, a French general James served under when he was only 21, said, if he were to conquer the world, he would choose the Duke of York to command his army. This one-time brave leader and soldier had suddenly, if we believe the established historian's account, become an incompetent coward. Burnet, being Queen Mary's favourite confidant, and hardly an impartial commentator, says that James' courage had sunk so low as to amaze those who had known the early part of his life. Paradoxically, in the same document, Burnet reveals that James's advisers, when seeing the pleasure he exuded looking forward to the ritual battle, were afraid he would play the hero a little too much. Without the appropriate keys, the received version of the battle is confusing and contradictory. Reviewing the activities of the leading players, it is easy to see events being manipulated to hasten them towards their destiny at the Boyne River to engage in the opening scene of the ritual battle. In the interim, a party of James's men ambushed and killed about 30 of an advanced group of Williamites and took a number of prisoners, including Captain Pharaohs. James was fond of Pharaohs, having known him at court in London, so when Pharaohs was questioned, James was of a mind to believe him. He told James that William had 50,000 seasoned troops ready to attack, and his ships were, even as they spoke, sailing along the Irish coast to land troops to encircle his army. It was then that James, it is narrated, took fright and retreated to the Boyne to make his stand against the wishes of his generals who wanted to press home the early success at Moray Pass. Why James did not confirm the validity or otherwise of Pharaohs' misinformation from his spies or scouts before he made his ill-fated decision to retreat from his strategic position is not explained. His action is clear to us, however, because we know he had a ritualistic and historic appointment at the Boyne River. Of course, traditional history looks for a military strategic reason for his retreat, one that allows for some rationale why James set up his defences at the less secure location at the Boyne. One of the reasons forwarded was that he was fearful of the superior numbers of his enemy and did not want William to get behind him, thus cutting off his retreat to Dublin. This makes no sense, since William's fleet could have easily sailed further down the Irish Sea and landed troops between Drogheda and Dublin, beyond the Boyne and behind James, thereby entrapping him. On the other hand, any decisions that James had seemed to go against conventional wisdom if looked at from a military viewpoint. James was fated, says the traditionalist, to make his last stand at the Boyne, a position he could not have been happy with if he had been fighting a conventional battle. According to Enda Boyle, James, speaking in the second person, rationalises this decision in his memoirs. What induced the king to hazard a battle on his inequality was that if it did not, there must lose all without a stroke, and he obliged to quit Dublin and all Munster, and so be reduced to the province of Connaught. Besides, his men seem desirous to fight, and being now raised, would have been disheartened still to retire before an enemy and see all their country taken from them without one blow for it. But as O'Boyle points out, despite what James had to say, had he fallen back behind the line of the Shannon, it is accepted that they could have held out for years. This will come as no surprise to us, because the more conventional story is disentangled, the more we are revealing the actual rationale of this battle. It was never the intention of James to hold out in Ireland. Like William, he was there for one reason, and one reason alone, and that was to take part in a historic Egyptian rite. Everything else was secondary. This is demonstrated by their unseemly haste to leave Ireland after their meeting at the Boyne. It could not be said by any stretch of the imagination that James lost the war because of his supposed defeat at the Boyne, and therefore had to flee the country. Wherefore, we must conclude, writes the author of A Light to the Blind as he continues to argue for mismanagement of the war, that the king had no solid reason to quit Ireland upon the loss he sustained at the Boyne in his troops, for the army was rather somewhat stronger at the end of that petty conflict than before, and its arrival before Limerick. It might have been reinforced by 10,000 resolute men at the least, and might have there given, as 'twas expected, with the highest probability of victory. However, the king resolved to go back to France, and so the next morning of the Boyne, being Wednesday, the 2nd of July, His Majesty departed from Dublin. Skirmishes. Because of James' supposedly crazy military manoeuvres, William's army was left virtually intact, comfortably ensconced in the environs of Mellifont Abbey, adjacent to the Boyne. During the afternoon of the day of his arrival in the Valley of the Kings, William, with the Prince of Denmark and some of his other senior staff officers, rode the short distance to the river. This was, received history informs us, to survey the battlefield and presumably to investigate the crossing points and gauge the strength of the opposing army. However, as will be presently seen, he came to the river at this time for a more cryptic reason. But let us listen to the establishment's historians first. When William had carried out his inspection of his enemy's disposition from Talisker Hill, coincidentally it was from this same hill Pope John Paul II addressed the faithful during his visit to Ireland, he incredibly sat down with his officers within pistol shot of James's forces on the opposite bank to have a picnic. Some reports say that he was so close to the enemy he could hear them conversing with each other. Unsurprisingly, he was recognised from the opposite bank by his opposing senior officers, and some Jacobite gunners thought they might make a name for themselves and end William's holy war prematurely. They advanced 2 cannon to the bank of the river and had a couple of pot shots at William's party. The Battle of the Boyne. So here's a map. There's a chapel, Dunor, Douth, Newgrange, Nouth. Here's the Boyne. This is William's, King William's Glen. So I'm not sure what armies are here. Oh, here we go. There's a key. Williamite army in the black, and the Jacobite army in the white. Just the old bridge. They advanced 2 cannon to the bank of the river and had a couple of pot shots at William's party, which killed us 2 horses and a man about 100 yards above where the king was. But immediately comes a second, which had almost been a fatal one, for it grazed upon the bank of the river, and in the rising slanted upon the king's right shoulder, tore out a piece of his coat, and tore the skin and flesh. The news was carried quickly to France that he could not outlive such a wound, and in fact that he had died, and upon it there were more public rejoicings than had been usual upon their greatest victories. Even William's own officers, sitting on horseback beside him, believed him dead, until he sat upright and said, "Thank God it came no closer." The group then retired to a hollow in the ground where William dismounted, and a field dressing was applied to the wound. As the officers crowded around him to express relief at his survival, he snapped, "What is wrong? Why do you not move on?" This intriguing incident, only superficially commented on by historians, was a Masonic type initiation. Seemingly, trivial incidents happening around William in the run-up to the beginning of the ritual battle can only be properly understood with an esoteric framework. For instance, in the later incidents, William receives a wound to the lower part of his leg. King William, in the forefront, seemed to bear a charmed life. One bullet had shot off the cap of his pistol. As he crossed the river, another took away a part of his boot and grazed his foot. Candidates for initiation, known colloquially as riding the goat, into the arch-purple degree of the Orange Order, will see something in the location of these wounds to William's person, his shoulder and lower leg, that would be familiar to them. Again, this will be explained in more detail in chapter 6. Meanwhile, the preparations for the ritual battle were advancing well, and at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, on the 1st of July, Count Maynard Schomberg, the old general's son, crossed the ford at Rosnaree with an army of 10,000 men. This was supposedly a feint to split James's forces, while the main attack led by Generals Schomberg and William took place at Oldbridge, the opening shots at the frontal attack being fired at about 8 in the morning. As the battle plans unfold, we will see a high degree of choreography between the 2 supposed combatants. Indeed, the significance of the timing of the entire proceedings had to be precise to reveal the initiate and hide from their enemies a solar ceremony. After some skirmishing back and forth across the river, Prince William commenced the main attack. He enters the battle and the river at noon. William now decided that the time was right for him to enter the fray. It was about midday. He seemed, according to most accounts, to cross without much difficulty. With all the odds which this battle was fought, and important were its ultimate consequences, the immediate gain for William was simply that he had crossed the Boyne. He had not captured a gun, and scarcely a standard to show for his victory. The vanquished, as we have seen, effected a retreat in almost perfect order. Once James had witnessed William successfully crossing the Boyne, he left the amphitheatre of Boyne and departed to Dublin, and then swiftly to France. The inconclusive battle, including the retreat, dragged on to about 10 in the evening. James left the field, and at the end of the day the Irish were forced to retire, but in good order for the most part. It was in reality a drawn battle. Enigmatically, James's retreat was to take him across the arcane land of Emwan and into Innis Island of the Kings, via a bridge that crosses the River Nanny. This river is one arm of the twin rivers that flew across Emwan, meaning twins, which gives Emwan its name to the coast. The other river, although not much more than a stream, is the Braden. A good map of the area will show that they ultimately meet in the sea to close the circle to create a fish-shaped island looking inland, for this forms Innis Joe Downey poetically describes the birth and journey of these twins. High on the slopes of the Bellstown Hill, to the northeast, below the racecourse, a spring bursts from within the rock. Flown down a short distance, it does a most extraordinary thing, entering a tiny pool. As balanced as a spirit level, it produces a pair of offspring who flop happily in precisely opposite directions. One flows east to the sea at Monsney, the other west, then circling north by northeast until it reaches the little townland of Gaffney. It too flows east to the sea at Laytown. The two currents meet at the sea and close the circle. That in turn, which is contained by the water, is an island. Legally, an island belonging to no one, because no legislate for an opposite would cancel out the laws of land and create unnecessary complications. From a material point of view, Irish kings were essentially cattle kings and could not care less about islands. From another point of view, however, islands had a spiritual, otherworldly quality about them, and access was allowed only to persons who were named or sacred, these being, in pagan times, a king, a druid, and a poet, and in Christian times, a king, a bishop, and a poet, prince, prelate, and poet. He goes on to explain that the history of Emwan contain virtual latines of twins. Gan and Genan predate the Celts and the Tuath de Danann and come from the Firbolg tradition. Cu and Cethin are twin stones. This echoes the theories of both Beaumont and Professor Bailey about twin comets, particularly because this is the area from which they would have been observed as they hurtled towards the Earth. It may be noted here that it was at a time when the Sun was in the constellation of the twins Gemini that the ritual battle took place. See sky map on page 243. James left Ireland for France on the 2nd of July 1690. He lived out the remainder of his life at Saint-Germain-en-Laye, outside Paris, where he died in 1701. William attempted to return to England on the 27th of July, but he was hampered because the French now had control of the seas between Ireland and England. The French navy had a great victory over the English and Dutch navy in the Channel. Burnet adds, they burned a miserable village called Teignmouth, which happened to belong to a papist. William, however, received a contrary report when he arrived in Dublin, that the emergency in England was not as bad as he had first feared, and so remained in Ireland. However, William left Ireland when the first opportunity presented itself, which happened after the first attack on Limerick about the 27th of August, when he supposedly couldn't persuade his men to renew the assault on the town. In all rage he left the camp, and never stopped till he came to Waterford, where he took shipping for England and then on to Holland. His leaving Ireland as soon as he could after his ritual is no surprise to us, since his mission to Ireland was completed when he had crossed the Boyne River. William eventually returned to England, where he died in 1702. Early in 1702, William was already planning renewed warfare with his old enemy, the French. Then, on the 21st of February, out riding in the parkland around Hampton Court, the king was thrown by his horse when the mount tripped on a molehill. The fall broke his collarbone, and the shaken, battered monarch was removed indoors in great pain. The doctors made a mess of his fracture, bronchitis set in, and he died on the 8th of March. William is remembered with more respect than affection. The Jacobites, nastily, commemorated the mole in ciphers and cartoons. For many years they proposed toasts to the wee gentleman in velvet. And so the two main participants departed from the stage to end one of the most significant, mysterious and misinterpreted episodes of this intriguing period of Irish and European history. This is where the account of the battle, from the establishment's historian's perspective, ends. An alleged unimportant religious skirmish that most people, perhaps because of today's political correctness, have little interest in or shy away from because they perceive it as one of the main causes of the Irish Troubles. If the Scottish Irish, particularly those on the extreme interfaces between Orangeanism and Republicanism, although perhaps some Orange men know half of their hidden history and yet keep it secret, put forward the effort needed to discover their history, they would also see an ancient and glorious heritage that brought civilization to most of the world. The Orange tradition would find their proper place and identify in their ancient homeland with their proper relationship with their fellow Ulstermen of every religion and none. When our true history is finally revealed, we will desist from living in the past and possibly, for the first time, start living for the future. Wise men say, and not without reason, that whoever wished to foresee the future might consult the past. Niccolo Machiavelli, 1469 to 1527. All we have to do to bring about a more prosperous future is to untangle and reevaluate our history and slot it into its proper context. When knowledge takes the place of manipulative belief, we will discover the meaning of the saying, "There is a difference between knowing the path and walking the path." This novel and undetailed account of Western history could hopefully point towards the elusive goal of a more peaceful and prosperous future. To simply know, for instance, that the people of both traditions belong here, there are no so-called planters today except farmers, can make a difference because there can be no peaceful future without the full and willing participation of the whole Ulster branch, that is, the red branch of the Scots-Irish. This will come about naturally when our common history is known and understood by all the Irish-British people, the Battle of the Boyne being a key to understanding that history. Having said that, it is not implied that we should adopt the model that some Republicans put forward as true Celtic history, and want the Unionists to adopt, whether they agree or not. This is hardly a common and inclusive history. There is an older and more radical history than the classic Republican ever imagined in his wildest dreams. When the whole of the Red Branch comes to know that they belong to and have their roots in what is now the island of Ireland, they will discover that they are descendants of a people that can trace their ancestry back for millennia, long before the age of the Celts. Yet the paradox is that the Celts, along with the rest of Western civilization, are part of the ancient race, whose ancestors are the prehistoric inhabitants of this magnificent and mysterious island. Okay people, I'm going to end that there. I'm going to keep it short tonight, because it's very late, and I'm kind of slowing down, so sorry about this reading tonight. It wasn't the sharpest, but what can you do? You just need to soldier on. You can't just keep restarting the reading. I'll be here all night, so I'll continue this sometime next week. Okay people, thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next listening. The reading, sorry. Jesus.